Are you sick and tired of being held back in the world of business because you're a millennial? Well, in this episode, we're going to show you how you can break through that barrier. Hello, Sales Nation. Welcome to today's episode of the Salesman podcast. On today's show, we have Dustin Sandoval. He's the author of The Millennial Mindset. He's also a sales manager, so it ties all in nicely with him being a practitioner, being able to offer real, true advice to millennials. And on today's show, he is sharing how you can break through any glass ceilings that millennials have, the benefits, the advantages that millennials have over anyone else, and how you can quickest climb the corporate ladder. So with all that said, let's jump in to today's show. Dustin, welcome to the Salesman podcast.
Great. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you on. I appreciate, I'll just say this to the audience, there's been some back and forth, some confusion and mix-ups on my end with Skype and everything that we use. So Dustin hung in there and got it another show in the diary. So I appreciate that, mate. I appreciate that hustle. And today we're going to talk about millennials, of which I am a member. I'm in this group. We're going to talk about the corporate ladder. We can perhaps somewhat define that as well for salespeople. With your kind of the background in sales management, I think that might be useful. And we're going to talk about, we're going to start by talking about glass ceilings. Is there a glass ceiling for millennials in the workplace as it is, as they try and go into sales management or sales enablement or multiple other ways of getting to that C-suite position that a lot of the audience, even though they're starting in sales and could probably earn more money in sales, they've got aspirations to be up there?
So it's a great question, and it's one that I think a lot of people want to know the answer to, right? The reality is that I don't think that there's a glass ceiling for any millennial or really any person of any age. I think that it comes down to results, right? And something that I would talk about and tell all of our people is that, take more personal accountability, right? Be the CEO of your own business. The interesting thing about, sales managers, whether you have a great sales manager or a not so great sales manager, is how much people tend to play a victim to that, right? You'll hear people who aren't successful, first thing they do is blame their sales manager, their territory, or their product. Yeah, when you talk to someone in sales who is successful, they never flip the prop to their sales manager, their territory, their product. It's always about how great they are. And I think that that's an interesting, it's an interesting correspondence where it can't work both ways. Like if you're going to give the credit to a sales manager, you would think that you can give the blame. And so I always tell people, like, obviously you want to have a great sales manager, and we certainly hope that you do. But at the end of the day, take the accountability onto yourself, right? You should be in charge of your results. You should be in charge of your own future.
So let me get this straight, just from what you said then, because there's two ways of looking at that.
Yeah.
So of course we want to be accountable. We want to be responsible for ourselves because that's what we've got leverage over, and this scales up just to life as a whole. And if you take responsibility for things, you don't fall into a victim mindset. And even if shit hits the fan, kind of one end of it is you don't hit target and you might lose your job, which is one thing, which is nothing really versus kind of shit hitting the fan in your personal life and someone being ill or something of that nature. If you take responsibility for it all, it at least gives you the option to whatever the circumstance to be able to say, right, I can move forward, I can carry on with this, versus kind of go, the world's all terrible and it's all like fell on top of me. So I appreciate that. But just to clarify, so that goes without saying, should we though be internally to climb up this corporate ladder? Should we be 100%, I won the business, it was me, I did all this, the sales manager's great, but it was I got the results? Or do we need to be a team player? Whether the sales manager is good, bad, or indifferent, do we need to say, Bob helped us, he and kind of like put a little bit of shine on that individual? Is there a right or wrong way from salesperson to kind of like start building leverage within an organization to move up within the ranks?
So it's a really good question. And I think that the answer is, like, obviously your guidance should come from your sales manager and your mentor. And I think that is the case with most sales organizations. But, I've heard other topics on the show where maybe you've got a great sales manager, but they're busy, go to one of the other top performers, right? Like, get guidance from them. And I think that personal accountability piece really goes back to, like, hopefully everything is working the way it's set up and your sales manager is your mentor and giving you the proper direction. But if it's not, I would tell somebody, go to the top performers, ask them what they're doing to be successful, ask them, to role play a scenario with you, see what you said and what didn't work, as opposed to, going back to that victim mentality of like, oh, it doesn't work, and woe is me, I'm going to look for my next opportunity type thing.
So take it a step further with the accountability that we allow others to, the perceived accountability and responsibility within our organization. What I mean by that is, if we've got a sales manager that's helping us, is it the right move to promote internally that is helping us to build leverage on them as we move up within the organization? Or is it, because people have different views on this, different leadership, kind of like thought leaders have different views on this. Or should we say, no, I did all this. Sales manager was kind of like a part of it, but I won all these deals, which to a CEO, C-suite, senior management who is going to be interviewing us for these next positions, whether it's sales management or whatever it is, which goes down better as we're trying to climb the corporate ladder?
I think the reality is that everybody has a team, right? Like, anybody who is successful or in their role today is there because somebody else helped them out, provided a mentorship, took a chance on them. I mean, that's certainly the case for me. So I think if you have the arrogance to think that you've done this all yourself, it's all you're the greatest thing that ever happened. I just think, one, that's not a reality, and then two, I think that if you're looking on any executive, or anyone in a position of power, they're going to realize the same thing. I mean, everybody is where they are because they've had a lot of help along the way. So, I think to go in as I'm the greatest thing that ever happened to the sales world or to this product, I don't think that's going to ultimately get you very far in your career.
I've got no data on this, and you might have some data or things to back this up. But anecdotally, I think there's a glass ceiling, not for someone's age or what generation they're born in, but I think there's a glass ceiling that splits the real pros, which tend to end up in C-suite positions, versus the people who do have that big ego, who think that they're incredible. I know many sales directors who have got to that position of sales directorship by providing the results, being super aggressive, doing all the right things, but they're complete arseholes, and they think that they are incredible, and they think that they're the most bright and the best salesperson within the organization. But because of that, they've got to that position, but they'll never get any further because they're not, as you described, they're not a team player, and they're not able to take criticism and things of that nature. And so it's almost a paradox of the best performing salesperson who is somewhat aggressive and is loud spoken is probably going to be one of the first one or two people lined up for that sales management position. But then as you get beyond that, as you get to directorship, as you get into the more senior positions where you've got accountability across the company, obviously a C-suite such as CIOs, CEOs could be taken to court, can be put in jail for doing things that a sales director could probably get away with and probably drive revenue with. And I think that's an interesting kind of like split between them. But going back to the responsibility piece here, do millennials believe, if there is no glass ceiling, do they believe that there is one?
I think that, part of being the misguided millennial, and I think that, there's a lot around instant self-gratification and look, like that's the generation that we all grew up in. So I'm a millennial myself. And I think that the piece of it with, trying to get ahead and trying to do what's right is you ultimately need to have some success, right? Like, you can't expect to just get promoted because you've got a degree from, a prestigious university. That may open the door for you, but you've got to find a way to have some success and really, take it a step further to the next level. To answer your other question on, getting promoted past the sales director role, I think that you need to build a lot of alliances around the way, right? It's something that we talk about in the book, and I refer to it as, building up your favor bank account, meaning that when you do something that helps somebody, they're going to remember that. Whether you get any gain from that today or tomorrow is really irrelevant, because if you really help somebody out, they're going to remember that, and in 2 to 3 years, you never know where they are, if they're in the same organization or with a different client. And those relationships, right? Those are what comes back to help you and to win a big sale or to win a big deal. I think that the salespeople who live for the instant gratification of like, I need to close this deal at all costs, They may close that deal, but to your point, 2 to 3 years down the road, if they really ruined a relationship or burned a bridge or pushed a product that a client didn't want, they're not going to be, of value in the future. And that's when I think they start their success starts to wane off.
I think you've summed up here far more elegantly than what I tried, what I attempted to. Of, I see sales, and this isn't everyone. I'm generalizing here massively, but I've seen sales managers and sales directors that are dog eat dog, that will go after every deal, that will be relentless, and as you described, try and close everything. And perhaps that's a good thing within the position that they're in, because revenue drives everything else within the organization. But the differentiation there, which you kind of pointed out brilliantly, was that the dog eat dog, they will close every deal, versus that the pros at the top, which I think when I have conversations with, when I interview them, there is a difference between the director level versus the VP versus the C-suite level. And that is that they're willing to give, even if it's just 51%, and accept that 49%. Obviously, that number is arbitrary. That number can change, and it probably just change over time as well. But that's perhaps a nicer and a more long-term way to look at it internally within your account. Of, if you just give that little bit more, it just builds up and ramps up over time, right, with the people around you.
Sure. And I think, everything's becoming more and more transparent, right? Like when you look over the past 10 years, a lot of times salespeople had all the information, right? Like that was what they had. They had the information. Like if you look at car buying, now anybody can go to kbb.com or any of the sites out there, and they can get all the information for themselves. So, the salesperson is no longer the informed buyer. The salesperson more so controls the experience. And I think that's going to only add to more referrals, regardless of we're talking about, direct to consumer, car selling, or, business to business. But, I think that the best salespeople that I've seen are ones who truly understand the client's problem, and they can provide a solution for it. And conversely, if that client comes to them and you don't have something in your suite of products or services that provide a solution, to let them know right away, look, this isn't something that we can help you with. I may have a referral or two from a different company that I know that can help you, but I'd rather give you the 25 minutes of this 30 minutes back and let you get on with your day. I think that builds value. And this is just my opinion, but I think as you go out over the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see more people that drive to that experience mindset. Because again, we've all got the information. I think it's ultimately the experience. And did you bring value, whether that was a product or realistically saving myself some time, if it's not a match for you, will ultimately be the deciding factor for salespeople.
For sure. I think just to drill down on that, the classic example that I've seen recently with the car world as the example, I don't know what it's like in the States, but here in the UK, the Tesla dealerships aren't a dealership with a forecourt. In Leeds, in the city where I live, it's next door to Burton Men's, I think, and it's just a shop. You go in, there's a bunch of iPads. It's almost like an Apple store, and you go in, and there's people there that will help, of course. But I don't even think they're commissioned, from the conversation that I had with one of them. He was being coy about it, but I don't think he's commissioned. And there's literally an iPad. You go choose the colors, you get all the details, and then you kind of essentially buy the car there and then on the spot by leaving a deposit, which is mental. It's turned the whole world of, if that took off, it would turn the whole world of car dealerships on its head. But coming back to this idea, well, it's not an idea, it's true, instant gratification. It's, again, I feel you've got to take responsibility for it. But there's something that I suffer from, for sure, that I have to, it's not natural for me to delay gratification. I think there's research in this, in that there's genes involved, there's upbringing involved, and it's not necessarily just that you're addicted to Candy Crush on your phone and Facebook notifications. Clearly that can empathize it, that can double down on the neural pathways that are kind of bypassing the want to delay gratification. And the irony of it all is that is one of the traits that makes us human. There's very few animals that can do it, and the animals that can do it, like chimps, for example, only can do it for a small period of time, whereas what most people do is delay most gratification of, they go to college, they get a job, they do all this so that they can retire when they're 60. Most people are delaying their lives till they're 60, which is another conversation on its own. We can perhaps talk about that another time. But where I'm going with this is there perhaps a perceived glass ceiling from millennials in all areas? So not just sales, but in all businesses. But it's perceived, and it doesn't exist, but we think it exists just because companies aren't promoting us as fast as what we feel that we should be promoted. Whereas in the past, other generations were told, from a very young age, and was drilled into them that you get a good job, you do your time, you're there for at large, a decade, 2 decades. They give you a gold watch, you get your promotions, and you've got to be in it for the grind. Whereas we feel that obviously there's an element, maybe this is is there an element of entitlement here, and that we feel like we deserve to go as fast as humanly possible, and clearly that's not appropriate for everyone.
So I think that that's exactly where the world has changed. And again, like, you and I are preaching to the choir, and that I am also a millennial, so I find myself, in many of these situations reading articles about, the instant gratification and, you need to pay your dues, so to speak. But I feel exactly what you just said is a mindset of the past. And I feel that anyone in leadership or management who is using this mindset of like, hey, I paid my dues, I worked in this job for 15 years before I got promoted, so you're going to need to do the same thing, that is going to hurt people, because the reality is that the world has changed. With just sites like Glassdoor, for example, you can look into, potential employers, you can look at their comp information. It's much easier to leave. I think the best example that I've got is, I started with my current company in 2005, and I've been fortunate enough to have the same, employer all through my life since college. That being said, I've never updated my resume. I have the exact same resume that I did in 2005 when I was graduating from college. But I do have a LinkedIn profile, and through that profile, I get anywhere from 2 to 3 job opportunities per week, right? I know that the people on my team, the people that work for me, are getting the same. And I think that the reality is that, like, if someone on your team doesn't see the vision, they don't understand how they can make money and how they can move up in the organization, and they're just getting told, hey, look, you need to wait it out till the job comes along, they're not going to be there for long, because those opportunities are going to keep on coming in. It's easier than ever. You no longer have to go put your resume together, put it on the job board, send it to a recruiter. You've got these invites coming in. And I think that's so key for sales managers and managers to understand, is that they need to engage with their employee. The world has changed in that way from my perspective.
So I don't know if you did it on purpose then, but you turned my question around so that it was empowering to millennials versus I was kind of giving them a hard time there. I was saying, and I'll ask you this question again so you can answer it from the other perspective, but I was saying, are we entitled? Do we feel entitled? Do we feel like we should be moving faster than what we should be, due to instant gratification and things of this nature? But and which is I loved, you turn that on its head of, are other generations who have paid their dues, so to speak, are they holding us back when we could be moving quicker because they've got a belief system and we've got a different belief system? And you're spot on. I think that is probably the case most of the time. Of talent should rise to the top, and perhaps people are putting arbitrary numbers on so many years service before you can make those leaps forward that shouldn't exist, and probably in super well-managed companies don't exist, because they can see talent, and talent trumps age, beliefs, anything else. But let me throw you the original question back at you and get the flip side of this. Are millennials entitled and believing that they can, jump through that corporate ladder faster than the experience that they've got will actually let them? Or is it in the eye of the beholder almost, of they should be allowed to move as fast as what they feel is comfortable for themselves?
I think it's all in the eye of the beholder, right? Like, I think that with all of the transparency that we're experiencing, with everything being online, all the information being available, that piece of it is empowering, and if you are talented, hopefully you're working in a true meritocracy, right? So it doesn't matter if you're 23, 33, or 43, if you are talented, you should be able to move up in your organization. If you're producing results, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to move up. And, I think that that's a key characteristic of being part of a good company. I think if you're listening to this and you're finding yourself like, hey, I am doing great, I am getting results, and I'm being told that, I need to wait another 10 years for a promotion, I think that should be a red flag as that you might be in the wrong organization. And that's one of the things that we talk about in the book too, is identifying the right company, making sure that you're aligned in the right place. Because going back to the time frame, I do feel that it's changed. Like, just look at communication mediums and like how quickly we've gone from radio to TV, then to Facebook, to Instagram, to Snapchat, right? Like, if you were an expert on Facebook 5 years ago, Instagram has came along and totally, wiped a lot of that out for the new emerging technology. Similarly, if you were an expert on Instagram 3 years ago, now Facebook is starting to get a lot of that, or excuse me, Snapchat is starting to get a lot of the ad dollars. And I think that's, again, an empowering piece for millennials, is that you no longer have to be a 20-year expert because emerging technologies are just coming so quicker.
Where is the limit with this, though? And I'll give you a practical example from our world of sales. I have plenty of, I don't want to put an age on it, but I feel like I have to. Even though I agree, age doesn't matter, but I'm biasing myself here, so I'm putting myself in with the people who are perhaps holding some of us back with prejudice. But I get pitched by a lot of, say 21 to 25-year-olds who want to come on the show, who are pitching themselves as a sales expert. So I do, the producer does a bit of research, and then they only kind of filter into my world and my emails to sign them off as a potential guest to come on the show, when I've done a little bit of research as well. So clearly I'll Google them, and then the most obvious one is I go on the LinkedIn profile, and when I see that they've only worked in a sales role for 2 or 3 years, no matter what success they've had, I don't consider them a quote-unquote sales expert. How can you be? How can you master something in 2 or 3 years? Don't get me wrong, they might have some amazing insights, and they might be able to come on the show and talk because they've been focused so nichely on one particular thing, and they've got incredible at sending emails that get responses. They could do a whole show on that, and it's really valuable for the audience. So I don't want to sound like the show is too important and big for anyone. That's not the case whatsoever. Quite the opposite. I'm happy to have people who don't have huge audiences on the show, and I know other podcasts that reach less people than what we do will only have people on when they've got 50,000 Facebook likes, whatever, for whatever reason. That's kind of part of the barrier to the amount of people that are trying to come on podcasts. But to kind of go back over this, I get these people that say, there's one lad, for example, and I've been going back and forth with him over email, so I won't call him out by name, but he'll be listening to this and he'll get it. He's just turned 20, so he was 19 when he was going back and forth with me. He's been selling since he was 16 for 3 years, and he's branded himself as a sales expert. He's got a self-published sales book out. I've not read it. It could be fantastic. I don't know, but there's kind of no reviews on Amazon for it. He was trying to pitch an email list at me, but there's like 100 people on there, which is great. And having an audience of 100 people is, if it's the right 100 people, it's enough to build a sales training business out of, for sure. But he was totally self-entitled, and he was totally in this weird belief that he was the best in the industry, and he was totally knocking by name a whole bunch of other people that have been selling and consulting on sales for a long, long time. And I had to, and it was pretty harsh the way I did it. And I used examples of myself of when I started the show. No one listened to it for 6 months, and even in that first year, it was still a smallish kind of business podcast. It's only the past 12 months that it's been racing forward. So I used me as an example to kind of like take the edge off the criticism that I was giving him. But he was a complete bullshit artist. He was trying to bullshit his way onto the podcast. So I'm going around the houses here, but Dustin, when we have belief in ourselves, when we've got some results that we're winning in sales or whatever it is, when is the correct time? When is the correct amount of experience? When do we know this? That we are legit and we are we were credible to take that next step. Because I know there's no arbitrary number of you've been selling for 7 years, so now you can be a sales manager. But how do we know when we're not just deceiving ourselves and we're just trying to grab the next job because we want a bit more cash?
Well, first off, I think that, one, I don't think that person should be the face of the millennial generation, right? Like, I think that you're always going to have aggressive people or over aggressive people. And, frankly, I think it goes back to what we were talking about originally, where like, if you go in there like, look, I'm the best, I'm better than everybody, all of these guys are terrible. That may be one person's style. In my opinion,
and let me just say this before you carry on, that I was an idiot when I was 20. So I'm not saying that there's anything different here, but as you get a little bit older, world experience does matter with a lot of this. Sorry, I didn't want to sound like I was being overly critical of him. Sorry, Justin, carry on, mate.
No worries at all. But I think that plays into that humility piece. Like, I love the fact that this guy has started, been selling for 3 or 4 years and that he's reaching out to you and that he's published a self-published book. Like, I love the hustle, right? Like, I think that that's great. I think as you get older, right? Like, I mean, I think at some point we all think that we're awesome or we want to strive to be awesome. But like, as you get older, you tend to get knocked down. And that doesn't mean not being successful, but that just means like, I'm not right all the time. I still lose, and I think that, again, that humility that comes with doing something comes with time. And like you said, that's probably part of just the maturation process. To the question of like, when is the right time, I would tell you just to start, right? And let the market decide. I think one of the things that I've always been attracted to about listening to your show is, you openly admit that you were never the top performer in your med device sales team, right? Like it's not like you come from this, I am the greatest salesperson to ever live the face of earth mentality. But what your talent is interviewing. Your talent is asking questions and being able to have an engaging conversation like we're having, and in all likelihood, it's probably the best thing you did for yourself launching into the podcast than trying to continue selling. And, I don't know if there is a right or a wrong time, but I think, if you have a venture, go for it and let the market decide. And, if it's not working, get some more experience and then try again. Again, that's just my perspective, but that's what I would tell you.
That is fascinating though, because it's not your perspective. That is the truth. I feel like you'll see this when the show comes out, but there's definitely going to be a quote card made up of just the words, let the market decide, because that's essentially what this young lad did. He asked to come on the show, and the market, obviously it's a market of one, I'm sure he'll get another podcast, told him no, and tried to give him the feedback why. So this is fascinating. This could be the premise for just getting on in life in general of, should we try and engineer this into... So some salespeople want to have a career in sales. Obviously, you can make incredible money. I always talk about it on the show of it's a vehicle to get somewhere. For me was the podcast. For me, it was, I would have had no hair, be weighed another 15 stone heavier than what I do, and been stressed out of my mind if I was still in that medical device sales role. There was, conflict with management. There was like hitting target, but not really crushing it. There was, the product was great, the company was great, but there's little things that it was not the perfect kind of like alignment for me. And I wanted to be creative. I wanted to have somewhat of a legacy. I wanted to build some kind of content, and there was other things that play outside of the sales role. So should we, if we have aspirations that are not necessarily bigger but different to just working in sales for the rest of our lives, is this something that we should engineer into our world of every year? Perhaps we test the market. If our aspiration is to become a sales trainer or a consultant, every year we should try and go on some podcasts, get some publicity, or we should reach out to a couple of companies and see if the market believes that we're a good fit for them yet. Is this something that proactively we should do and force ourselves to do that will get us out of our comfort zone, and over the course of a decade, doing this could lead to results that we wouldn't necessarily have believed were possible at the very beginning of it?
I think that anybody should always try and find their talent. And, I've always been around a lot of salespeople. And I think that the ironic thing about salespeople is that, whether you're a salesperson or not, generally most successful people are very good at selling themselves, right? So you take successful salespeople who can sell XYZ's company's product. Look, that may be their talent, and they may be awesome at selling somebody else's product, and that's great. But, if they have an unknown hidden talent, like, if it's an interviewing talent or a writing talent or, whatever, a cooking talent, if you really feel that you've got some sort of talent, I absolutely believe that you should get out there and try it. And I think, that's the most exciting thing about the world that we're living in, is that, you don't need a record company to put a piece of music out there anymore. You can record it with basic Apple equipment and get it out there. You can start a podcast, you can start a blog, you can start any of that. Now, if you started saying like, I'm so awesome at writing this blog, right? I would say, okay, great. Take a shot at it and see how many followers you get. See if it picks up. But I think that's the piece, like going back to like the whole millennial tie-in, is that you should and can start anything, but at the end of the day, the market's going to be right. And again, you may think that you're awesome, but if nobody's downloading your podcast, you got to listen to the market, and you got to realize that you need to get better, more well-trained, more well-versed before you try again.
Amazing. Well, I want to wrap up with this, and we'll stick to the topic of, or the context of podcasts for a second. So for me, it was a good 12 months before anyone cared about anything that I did. And there was a lot of experimentation at the beginning of that, of writing blog posts, which I really enjoy, and some of them have done really well, but it was hit or miss. Then there was videos that we were doing, and there was different styles, and then the podcast itself was just really shit at the beginning because I didn't know what I was doing, and I was nervous about asking difficult questions, and I was getting wrapped up in this guest. Should I push them? Are they just going to hang up, or am I going to get an email a week later saying that they couldn't use the content? And excuse me. And a lot of that was eliminated by once the audience got to a certain size, I didn't have to care so much about losing people coming on the show because they would answer difficult questions to be on the show, if that makes sense. But the point I'm trying to make, and what I want to ask you, Dustin, is it took 12 months to get to that point of me doing it full time. And I do think I'm, without blowing my own trumpet, I do think let me rephrase that. I'm definitely a better interviewer than I am a writer. I'm definitely better at selling the podcast advertising space than I was selling medical devices because it's mine. I own it. And I'm more bought into it than anything else. And that is important to me. So I can sell it easier. It's been a pleasure to sell. Absolutely. There's very few people that have ever said no to me. And so obviously when rejection is almost taken off the table, it becomes a joy. But how do we know how long we should attack something for? Because I worked in medical device sales the last kind of 18 months. I hated it. And, I'd had a good run up until that point, and I still hit target by the time I'd left. But that 18 months was spent saving up cash so that I could have 12 months of attacking, wherever it was. I was trying to find my talent. How long being in the back of your mind in the conversation of millennials are, quote unquote, instantly gratified, and their brains are wired differently to previous generations because of that. How long should we give to our talents? Because there's two elements of this. I'm asking you about 500 questions here. I appreciate that because I'm working through this in my own mind. But there's two questions here. One, how long should we give it before we know whether something is a fit for us? And then two, how do we stop jumping about from sales role to sales manager role to different company to grass is greener in this industry? Now I'm going to go to this vertical. Now I'm going to go to the competitor, because that's clearly not going to get us anywhere in the long run either.
I think there's two real key concepts at play. One is kind of following your big passion, and you're doing something that could end up a crazy success or a crazy failure. So, starting your own blog, your own podcast, recording an album, something like that. And I think that answer, that's really tough, because that gets into the follow your dreams. Like, how long till you really give up on your dreams? Some people do it after a year. Some people are still trying after 20 years. So I think that piece is only something that individual person can answer. I do think the other piece that I want to make a comment on is on the sales side, right? And the perception of the perennial job hopper that's in the millennial generation that leaves a company after 6 months. What I would tell anyone listening to that is the grass is rarely greener on the other side. It really isn't. And, I think when you're looking at, not having success in your organization, going back to that personal accountability piece, if there are other people who are where you want to be that are, in the same company, in the same division, who are making the money that you are, or they've got promoted and you're just not getting promoted, I think that's where you got to look within yourself. It's probably not something that the company, the product, or the sales manager has to do with. It's probably more so something that you are not doing. And I think that's a big guidance to any millennial is like, stop blaming anybody and everybody and put all the accountability on yourself. Now, if you're in an organization where nobody is where you want to be, nobody's making the money, nobody's getting promoted, then I think that's more of a red flag that you're in an organization that is not really aligned to your goals. But if other people are doing it and you're just not there yet, I would say look inside first, talk to your sales manager, talk to people who are successful, ultimately think of it this way. This is the way I think of it. I'm probably the problem. How do I fix it, right? Like, I know that it's not the system, but it's me. And I think that if you look at it from that perspective, you're going to get a lot further than trying to blame others.
Love it. I love it. It's almost like, I'm going to butcher it now, but it's essentially, if you don't know who the dumbest person in the room is, it's probably you. It's not the dumbest person, whatever it is, but that kind of suits this as well. And I think you're spot on here. I think the company has to align with what you want to do. And I think maybe the millennials are the first group of people that have come along since the Industrial Revolution, when obviously everything changed. Everything was automated as much as it could be. You had the production workflows that were never there before. Perhaps the millennials are the first people to come along with, they're a bit more selfish in what they want and their needs. And there's no world wars. There's no real reason for us to all rally together. There's no overarching control that's telling us we must do this for the sake of the country or anything, weird like that. Maybe we're just the first people that perhaps is not entitled. Perhaps this is how it should have been the whole way along. And with that, Dustin, I've got one final question for you, mate. Something I ask everyone that comes on the show. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
What I would tell a younger Dustin Sandoval is really two things. One is think bigger, and two is create solutions, not excuses. And what I mean by that is, excuses in their nature can actually be true. Like going back to the sales example of, if you're trying to call a prospect and you've called them 50 or so times and you still can't get in touch with them, look, maybe they don't answer the phone, and that's fine. Calling them another 50 times just to tell your sales manager, like, look, I've been calling this person 100 times, that's an excuse. It's still true, but it's an excuse. When I mean focus on solutions, like, try linking in with him, try getting commonality with different connections, try finding a different way, like find a solution to the problem as opposed to just making an excuse as to why it's not getting done. And, I think as I've gotten older, I think that's something that a younger Dustin Sandoval could have definitely benefited from.
Amazing stuff. Have you read The 1 Minute Manager?
I have.
So that ties into a similar kind of concept of when you're delegating tasks, getting people to come to you with the solution to, or the what they suggest as a solution to the task versus I can't do this because. And that in an instant, I've never thought of you turn this on its head for sales and salespeople projecting outwards of customers, which is amazing. But I've never thought about that concept before that book. But now that we're building a little team behind the podcast with editors and writers and the producer, that saved me so much time every single day. Of the producer will be, I can't get this person on because they're not available until August, and then that would be the end of the email. That'd be that. Then it's on me then to kind of respond in some kind of way and guide Amy with this. And as soon as I explain this concept to her, because she's super bright, she's no idiot, she's quick enough to suss all this out herself. That once I put that bit of framework into it, it would be, I can't get this person until August. I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I'm going to follow up. I'm going to put a notification in my diary. And it's almost like it doesn't need a reply from me then. If it does need a reply, it's just a pat on the back as opposed to me using my brain power to solve the problem. And it empowers her as well. And then I started, once I read the book, started doing this with some of the customers that I had with for the sponsorship side of things. Of there will be, and obviously there's a fine line here between they're paying me to solve their problems of driving traffic and bringing on new customers for them, but making them work a little bit in the relationship also empowers them and allows kind of greater connectivity between the two of us. Of then it turns into a brainstorming phone call where you're being a true consultant. And again, I'd never really done that before because I never given myself permission to make the customer work a little bit. Because you're helping them achieve the job's kind of requirements, the internal kind of, how to describe it. You're whatever you're doing, however you're framing it, is helping them do their job better so that they can potentially earn more money, get promotion, or whatever's important to them. And just the simple act of having a little bit of pushback and saying, well, what do you think is the best solution? Immediately, they're typically far more knowledgeable about the industry, the space, the vertical, their own internal politics and all this kind of stuff. And as soon as I started putting a little bit of pushback on them, I got loads of reward for it. So I just wanted to double down and give an example of that because that was amazing. I've never really put two and two together, and that book was the stem of it for me. So I highly recommend that book for the audience. And just on that, Dustin, are there any books that you'd recommend, other than your own, which we'll come on to in a second for sure, but are there any books that you'd recommend to the audience to enable them to take responsibility or empower themselves a little bit? Because that's been a lot of the topic today, of taking total responsibility for their future success.
So I think that there's a really good hybrid, because some people almost think that these books are completely the opposite, and they kind of are, but I think that they contradict very nicely. And book one is a book called The Secret. right? All about positive thinking and the power of mindset. And then book 2 is a book by Grant Cardone called 10X, which is all about execution and doing, 10X more of the work. And so I think when you combine those two philosophies, it's not just sitting back and having, positive thoughts and wishful thinking. And at the same time, you can't just grind 10X without having a goal or a target. But I think that both of those books, align very, very nicely to create a really good mindset for a successful person.
Amazing stuff. Well, with that, talking about books, tell us about your book, Dustin, where we can find it, what's within it. And clearly, if you've been interested in this conversation so far, Sales Nation, it's going to be really applicable for you.
Yep, absolutely. So the book's called Millennial Mindset. It's available on Amazon.com. Simple. Go into the browser, put it in there. There's a hard copy or a digital version that you can download. And like we mentioned earlier, I think that this book is a must-have for anyone who's a millennial who's one, stuck in their job, not happy with where they're going, or two, anyone who is a manager of millennials to help them better understand how they think and how they work. Ultimately, it's a guide to hacking the corporate ladder. And the one thing I would tell you about it, this is not a mundane business book. Like, this is going to give you some new insight and definitely some new techniques on how to get there.
Amazing stuff. Well, we'll link to that in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with that, Dustin, we've gone back and forth here, mate. We've covered some ground with the different topics. So I appreciate that. These are my most favorite shows to record versus the sales process of do X, Y, Z. And I think there's a lot of subtle value to these episodes of it might not be necessarily I'm going to do X, Y, Z on my next email, but it's episodes like this that really get people thinking and over the longer term, I think have real value to them. So I appreciate that. And I want to thank you, with all that said, for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
It was a great conversation. Appreciate it.